A dead Marine lies in the mud of a Vietnamese jungle, his hands still clutching the rifle he was desperately trying to fix. Beside him, another and another. Their weapons are disassembled, cleaning rods jammed down barrels, bolts locked open. They didn't fall to a sniper's bullet or a hidden booby trap. They died in the middle of a frantic, impossible calculation, trying to clear a jammed rifle faster than an enemy soldier could pull a trigger. In 1967, a Marine in Vietnam wrote a letter home that would eventually be read into the Congressional record. It said, "We left with 72 men in our platoon and came back with 19. Believe it or not, you know what killed most of us? Our own rifle. Practically every one of our dead was found with his M16 torn down next to him, where he had been trying to fix it." This was the M16, the lightweight space-age weapon that was supposed to give the American soldier an unbeatable technological edge. Instead, it was failing them at the worst possible moment. The rifle became a national scandal, a symbol of failure, nicknamed the Mattel Toy for its plastic parts and fatal unreliability. But the story that the world came to believe, that the M16 was a flawed weapon, is a lie. The truth is far more disturbing. The M16 was a brilliant revolutionary design, betrayed. Its catastrophic failures on the battlefield were not caused by a weakness in its engineering, but by a chain of seemingly small, arrogant decisions made by a military bureaucracy that refused to listen. This is the story of a perfect storm of institutional pride, penny pinching, and negligence that turned a masterpiece of design into a death trap. This is the story of how the United States Army almost destroyed its own greatest rifle, and the self-taught genius who created it. In the world of mid-20th century military ordnance, there were certain truths held to be self-evident. A battle rifle, the weapon of the common soldier, was forged from steel and cradled in wood. It was heavy because strength required mass. It fired a large, powerful cartridge capable of striking down an enemy at 600 yards because long-range marksmanship was the foundation of infantry doctrine. This was a religion, with its dogma written in the blood of conflicts from the Civil War to the Korean War. The M1 Garand, the weapon General Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised, was the Holy Scripture. It was 9.5 pounds of American steel and walnut, a testament to this philosophy. According to the high priests of this religion, the engineers and officers of the United States Army Ordnance Corps, the idea of a truly lightweight automatic rifle was heresy. It was a physical impossibility. The recoil from a full-power cartridge would be uncontrollable. The materials required to make it light enough would never withstand the violent pressures of sustained combat. Any man who claimed he could build such a weapon was either a charlatan or a fool. But in a small garage in Long Beach, California, a man who was neither was committing heresy on a nightly basis. His name was Eugene Stoner. Born in Gosport, Indiana in 1922, Stoner was a child of the Great Depression. College was a luxury his family could not afford. Instead of lecture halls and fraternities, his university was the factory floor of Vega Aircraft Company, where he installed armaments on military planes. He had no formal engineering degree, no pedigree from West Point. His education came from the cold logic of machinery and the unique properties of a material that the gun world had largely ignored: aircraft-grade aluminum. For generations, gunsmiths saw only steel. Stoner, surrounded by the skeletons of bombers and fighters, saw potential in the lightweight, corrosion-resistant alloys that allowed men to fly. He filed this observation away. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, the 19-year-old enlisted, not in the infantry, but in the Marine Corps, specializing in aviation ordnance. He spent the war in the South Pacific and China, but his true battlefield was the repair depot. He never saw combat, but he saw its aftermath etched into the tools of war. He saw weapons fail. He watched Marines wrestle with the heavy M1 Garand in the suffocating jungle humidity. He studied the nearly 20-pound Browning automatic rifle, a beast of a weapon that sacrificed mobility for firepower. He took apart the complex, innovative Johnson rifle, a design dismissed by the military establishment as too unconventional. Every evening, surrounded by broken and battered firearms, Stoner wasn't just repairing them. He was dissecting their flaws. He filled notebooks with sketches, not of abstract theories, but of practical solutions. A stock that ran in a straight line behind the barrel to channel recoil directly backward, preventing the muzzle from climbing during automatic fire. A gas system that eliminated the heavy piston and operating rod that had been standard for decades. A modular construction that would allow a soldier to break down his weapon in seconds. His fellow Marines saw an obsession. Stoner saw a series of interconnected problems demanding a single, elegant solution. When the war ended, he returned to California, a veteran with a high school diploma and a mind full of revolutionary ideas. He spent nearly a decade working as a design engineer at aircraft parts manufacturers, honing his skills, mastering the precise art of machining aluminum to tolerances the firearms industry considered impossible. All the while, his garage remained his private laboratory. Then, in 1954, a door opened. A tiny, almost experimental company called Armalite, a division of Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation, was looking for a chief design engineer. Armalite's entire mission was to do what the rest of the industry refused to: bring aerospace materials and manufacturing techniques to firearms. With fewer than a dozen employees and no factory of its own, it was a high-risk gamble. For Stoner, it was a perfect fit. He was hired in October 1954 and immediately confronted the biggest challenge in the firearms world. The U.S. Army was looking to replace the legendary M1 Garand. The new rifle had to fire the powerful 7.62mm NATO cartridge, a round designed for long-range combat. The giants of the industry submitted their offerings. Springfield Armory presented the T-44, essentially a modernized Garand. Fabrique Nationale of Belgium offered their FAL rifle, a proven conventional design. Both were made of steel and wood. Both weighed around 9 pounds. They were solid, reliable, and utterly predictable evolutions of the existing dogma. Stoner's submission was designated the AR-10. When the specifications sheet arrived at the Army's testing grounds, the officials thought there was a typo. The rifle was listed as weighing just over 7 pounds. It was impossible. When the physical rifle arrived in late 1956, it looked like something from science fiction. The stock and handguards were not wood, but a composite of fiberglass and foam. The receiver wasn't steel, but forged 7075 T6 aluminum alloy. The stock flowed straight back from the barrel, an ergonomic design that testers would later praise for its remarkable control during automatic fire. Most revolutionary of all was the gas system. Instead of a heavy piston, Stoner's design siphoned hot gas from the barrel through a tiny tube and directed it straight back into the bolt carrier, using the expanding gas itself to cycle the action. This direct impingement system, as it was called, eliminated nearly 2 pounds of moving parts. Initial tests were stunning. The AR-10 was more accurate than its competitors, and despite its light weight, the easiest to control. The impossible rifle seemed to work. Then, during a brutal endurance test, disaster struck. The barrel, a composite design with a steel liner and an aluminum sleeve specified by Armalite's president over Stoner's strenuous objections, burst. The rifle was destroyed. The Army's final report was a backhanded compliment. They acknowledged the AR-10's brilliant innovations, but concluded it was too unproven, too radical. They estimated it would take 5 more years to perfect. The Army chose the conventional T-44, which would become the M14. The myth of the heavy rifle remained unbroken. The establishment had won. Stoner's AR-10 had failed. But in that failure was the seed of his next and greatest creation. While the M14 began its troubled production, and the AR-10 found limited success with a few foreign militaries, a new question began to haunt military strategists. Analysis of combat from World War II and Korea revealed a startling fact. Most infantry firefights happened at ranges under 300 yards. The powerful NATO cartridge, designed for 600-yard engagements, was overkill. It was heavy, limiting the amount of ammunition a soldier could carry, and its powerful recoil made automatic fire largely useless in a lightweight rifle. In 1957, the U.S. Continental Army Command, looking to the future, issued a requirement for a new kind of weapon, a lightweight rifle firing a small-caliber, high-velocity projectile. For Eugene Stoner, this was not a new problem, but a new opportunity to apply the lessons learned from the AR-10. He took his failed masterpiece and scaled it down. The aluminum receiver, the straight-line stock, the direct impingement gas system, all the revolutionary concepts remained, but they were now built around a tiny cartridge, the 223 Remington. Originally a civilian cartridge for hunting small animals, the 223 fired a bullet less than half the weight of the NATO round, but at a blistering velocity of over 3,000 feet per second. This speed created a devastating terminal effect. The small bullet would tumble and fragment upon impact, creating wounds far out of proportion to its size. The new rifle, designated the AR-15, was astonishing. Loaded with a 20-round magazine, it weighed just 6 pounds. A soldier could now carry more than double the ammunition for the same weight as a loadout for the M14. The Army tested the AR-15 and swiftly dismissed it. They had just spent millions developing the M14. Their institutional pride and enormous financial investment were tied to the heavy rifle concept. Admitting that a 6-pound rifle firing a varmint cartridge was superior was unthinkable. The Ordnance Corps actively worked to kill the design, ensuring that neither the U.S. military nor its allies would purchase it. By 1959, Armalite was bleeding money. With no buyers, they sold the rights to the revolutionary AR-15 to Colt's Manufacturing Company for a mere $75,000 and a small royalty. Eugene Stoner's dream rifle, the weapon that was supposed to redefine infantry combat, seemed destined for a dusty museum shelf. And it would have stayed there, were it not for a 4th of July barbecue. The date was July 4th, 1960. At a farm in Maryland, Richard Boutelle, a former president of Armalite's parent company, was hosting his annual Independence Day party. The guest list was a who's who of Washington's elite, including one of the most fearsome and influential figures in the American military, General Curtis LeMay, Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. LeMay was a living legend. He had orchestrated the firebombing of Japan in World War II and built the Strategic Air Command into the most powerful nuclear force on Earth. He was gruff, cigar-chomping, and had a famous contempt for bureaucracy and anyone who told him something couldn't be done. A Colt salesman, hoping to find an influential ear, had brought an AR-15 to the party. He set up a row of watermelons downrange and, with a bit of luck, managed to get the rifle into General LeMay's hands. The general, a seasoned marksman, fired. The watermelons didn't just split, they vaporized. The tiny, high-velocity bullets disintegrated them in spectacular fashion. LeMay burned through several magazines, his interest growing with every pull of the trigger. He peppered the salesman with questions. 6 pounds loaded? A soldier can carry 240 rounds. 43% of shooters qualify as expert with it, compared to only 22% with the M14. For LeMay, this wasn't about doctrine or tradition. It was about simple, brutal logic. His Air Force security police were still carrying World War II-era carbines, weapons totally inadequate for defending sprawling air bases from a modern attack. The AR-15 was the solution. Standing there, amidst the smell of gunpowder and grilled hot dogs, Curtis LeMay made a decision that would change military history. He told the Colt representative he wanted to order 8,500 rifles on the spot. That single impulsive decision at a backyard barbecue was the fluke event, the critical turning point that blasted the AR-15 out of obscurity and set it on a collision course with the Pentagon's most powerful institution. General LeMay's barbecue order slammed headfirst into the brick wall of Army bureaucracy. The Army controlled all small arms procurement for every branch of the military, and they had already rejected the AR-15. General Maxwell Taylor, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, personally advised President Kennedy against the purchase, citing the logistical nightmare of having 2 different rifle calibers in the field. LeMay's request was denied, but Curtis LeMay was not a man who took no for an answer. What followed was a 2-year bureaucratic war waged from the highest levels of the Pentagon. Promoted to Air Force Chief of Staff, LeMay used his new power to relentlessly champion the AR-15. He submitted formal requests, armed with Air Force test data proving its superiority. He cornered officials in meetings. He argued, cajoled, and threatened. He made it clear that the Army's objections were not based on facts, but on institutional pride and a stubborn refusal to admit they had chosen the wrong rifle with the M14. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, events were conspiring to prove him right. In the jungles of South Vietnam, American advisors watched as their allies, armed with heavy M1 Garands, were being outgunned by Viet Cong guerrillas armed with the light, handy, and reliable AK-47. The AK-47, firing an intermediate cartridge, was conceptually a Soviet cousin to the AR-15. It was a weapon perfectly suited for the close-quarters chaos of jungle warfare. Desperate requests for a better weapon started flowing back to Washington. This pressure from the battlefield finally caught the attention of the data-driven Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. In late 1961, he authorized a field test. 1,000 AR-15s were sent to Vietnam. The reports that came back were glowing. Special Forces operators called it the ideal jungle weapon, light, short, and devastatingly effective. South Vietnamese soldiers who tested the rifle flat out refused to give them back, claiming it gave one man the firepower of 3. McNamara was now caught between 2 completely contradictory narratives. The Army insisted the M14 was superior. The men actually fighting the war insisted the AR-15 was a game-changer. Trusting data over doctrine, McNamara commissioned an independent, head-to-head comparison of the AR-15, the M14, and the AK-47. The result, known as the Hitch Report, was released in the summer of 1962. It was a bombshell. The report concluded that the AR-15 was superior to the M14 in every single measurable way. Even more damning, it found that the Army's brand-new, fantastically expensive M14 was inferior to the Soviet AK-47 it was supposed to defeat. The Army's arguments collapsed under the weight of objective analysis. In November 1962, McNamara overrode the Army's objections and authorized the first large-scale procurement of the AR-15 for the Air Force and Special Forces. By late 1963, a contract was signed for over 100,000 rifles, now officially designated the M16. The ripple effect of that July 4th barbecue had become a tidal wave. The self-taught machinist's impossible rifle, the weapon the experts had rejected and tried to bury, was now being mass-produced and shipped to war. It seemed like a total victory for innovation over inertia. But as the first large shipments of M16s arrived in Vietnam in 1964, a new, far more sinister set of dominoes was already beginning to fall. The Army, forced to accept a rifle it never wanted, would now make a series of quiet, seemingly minor changes to the weapon's specifications. These changes, made without consulting the rifle's designer and without proper testing, would have catastrophic consequences. The M16 went to Vietnam a masterpiece. It would soon become a nightmare. The reports started as a trickle in late 1965, then became a flood. The M16s were jamming in combat. Soldiers described the rifle as a piece of junk, a liability that was getting them killed. The malfunction was terrifyingly consistent. The rifle would fire, but the spent cartridge case would fail to extract, getting stuck fast in the chamber. The only way to clear it was to force a cleaning rod down the barrel, an impossible task in a firefight. Horror stories poured in from the front lines. Soldiers were so afraid of their own weapons that they began scavenging AK-47s from the enemy, risking court-martial for a rifle they could trust. The weapon meant to symbolize American technological superiority had become a symbol of betrayal. Eugene Stoner was horrified. He flew to Vietnam in 1967 to find out what had happened to his creation. What he uncovered was not a design flaw, but a series of deliberate, cost-cutting modifications made by the very Army Ordnance Corps that had fought his rifle from the beginning. He discovered 4 cardinal sins, a perfect storm of bureaucratic malpractice that had turned his reliable weapon into a killer of its own men. The first sin was the gunpowder. Stoner had designed and tested the AR-15 using a specific propellant, IMR 4475, a type of powder that burned cleanly and produced consistent pressure. But the Army, without consulting Stoner or Colt, switched the ammunition specification to a cheaper ball powder. This ball powder burned significantly dirtier, leaving far more carbon residue inside the rifle's action. Even worse, it created a higher gas pressure, which increased the rifle's rate of fire from a manageable 750 rounds per minute to a blistering 1,000. This higher cyclic rate put immense stress on the extraction system, trying to hip up the cartridge case from the chamber before the pressure had fully subsided. The combination of a dirtier chamber and a more violent extraction was the primary cause of the stuck cases. The second sin was the most unforgivable: the lack of chrome plating. Stoner and Colt had insisted from the very beginning that the rifle's chamber be chrome-plated. This was standard practice for weapons intended for use in humid, corrosive environments like the jungles of Vietnam. Chrome plating prevents rust and makes the chamber surface slicker, aiding in extraction. But the Army, in a decision to save an estimated $2.50 per rifle, deleted the specification. They claimed it was an unnecessary expense. In the relentless humidity of Southeast Asia, the unlined steel chambers quickly began to corrode. This corrosion created microscopic pits in the chamber walls, which gripped the brass cartridge cases like sandpaper. When combined with the dirty, high-pressure ball powder, it created a recipe for guaranteed failure. The third sin was a lie. In a stunning act of hubris, the Army decided to market the M16 to its own soldiers as a self-cleaning rifle. They told troops it required little to no maintenance. To compound this lie, They failed to issue cleaning kits or even basic instruction manuals with the first rifles sent to Vietnam. Soldiers arrived in combat with a brand new weapon they had never been trained to maintain, without the tools to do so, and having been told it wasn't necessary anyway. Stoner's direct impingement system, while brilliant and lightweight, vented hot carbon-fouled gas directly into the receiver. Regular cleaning wasn't just recommended, it was essential. The lack of it, combined with the other two sins, ensured the rifles would quickly become so fouled they would cease to function entirely. The fourth and final sin was the addition of the forward assist. Stoner had deliberately designed the rifle without a manual bolt closure device. His philosophy was simple. If a round doesn't chamber properly on its own, there is a problem. A dirty chamber or a defective cartridge, that needs to be cleared. Forcing it forward will only make the situation worse. But Army officers, accustomed to the charging handles on their old rifles, insisted on adding one. This seemingly innocuous plunger on the side of the receiver encouraged soldiers to do the exact wrong thing, to jam a round into a dirty, corroded chamber, creating an even more severe jam that would be impossible to clear without a cleaning rod. By 1967, the scandal could no longer be contained. On May 15th, Representative Richard Eichord of Missouri convened a special congressional subcommittee to investigate the M16 disaster. The testimony was explosive. Eugene Stoner explained, with meticulous detail, how the Army had systematically dismantled the reliability of his design. Colt representatives presented internal memos showing they had warned the Army about the ball powder and predicted the extraction failures months before they started killing soldiers in the field. The Army ordnance officers, under oath, admitted they had never properly tested the new ammunition. They admitted they had failed to issue cleaning kits. They admitted they had called the rifle self-cleaning, with no data to support the claim. The subcommittee's final report was one of the most damning indictments ever leveled at a branch of the U.S. military. It concluded that the M16's problems were caused by mismanagement, neglect, and decisions that bordered on criminal negligence. The truth was finally out. The rifle wasn't flawed. It had been sabotaged by the very people tasked with deploying it. The Congressional investigation was a public shaming that forced immediate and sweeping change. The Army rushed to correct its sins. The fatal ball powder was replaced with a cleaner burning formula. Millions of cleaning kits, complete with a comic book-style instruction manual, were flown to Vietnam. Most importantly, all new M16s were produced with the chrome-lined chambers and barrels that Stoner had specified from the very beginning. The improved rifle, designated the M16A1, was a revelation. With the proper ammunition, proper maintenance, and a corrosion-proof chamber, it performed exactly as its designer had always intended. The jam rates plummeted. Soldiers in the field, once distrustful, began to see the weapon for what it was: a light, accurate, and controllable rifle that gave them a distinct advantage in the jungle. They could carry more ammunition, maneuver more quickly, and lay down more effective suppressive fire than their enemy. The rifle that had been a symbol of betrayal slowly earned back the trust of the American soldier and became a respected and effective tool of war. The M16A1 would serve through the rest of the Vietnam War and for decades after, becoming the longest-serving rifle in American history. It evolved over the years into the M16A2 in the 1980s, the M16A4 in the 1990s, and most famously, into the shorter M4 carbine that is the standard infantry weapon today. But through all these iterations, the core of Eugene Stoner's genius remains: the straight-line stock, the modular construction, the aluminum receiver, and the direct impingement gas system conceived in a California garage half a century ago. Eugene Stoner himself left Armalite after the AR-15 rights were sold, continuing his work as a quiet, brilliant innovator. He designed the modular Stoner 63 weapon system for Cadillac Gauge, which was used by Navy SEALs in Vietnam. He later co-founded ARAS Incorporated, where he experimented with concepts decades ahead of their time, like polymer-cased and caseless ammunition. In his late 60s, he joined Knight's Armament Company and designed the SR-25, a rifle that scaled his AR-15 design back up to the powerful 7.62mm NATO round, finally perfecting the concept he had started with the AR-10 40 years prior. The SR-25 was adopted by U.S. Special Operations Forces as a sniper rifle, a final validation of his life's work. Eugene Stoner died of cancer in 1997, a modest man who never grew wealthy from his world-changing invention. He was buried at Quantico National Cemetery, among the Marines he had served alongside. His legacy, however, is not quiet. His rifle fundamentally changed infantry tactics, logistics, and the very way modern wars are fought. But it also became one of the most controversial objects in American society, with the civilian AR-15 becoming a flashpoint in the nation's debate over gun control. The story of the M16's troubled birth is more than just the history of a firearm. It is a timeless and universal lesson about the collision between innovation and institution. It's a cautionary tale about the profound danger of bureaucratic arrogance. The belief that established experts in a corner office know more than the innovator in the garage, and that institutional pride is more important than the lives of soldiers on the battlefield. The Congressional investigation concluded that the Army's failures bordered on criminal negligence, yet no one was ever held accountable. The system protected itself. Eugene Stoner, the self-taught machinist with no college degree, succeeded where an army of credentialed experts failed. He proved that genius can come from anywhere, and that a good idea, if it is powerful enough, can eventually overcome even the most entrenched resistance. The M16 disaster was not a failure of engineering. It was a failure of leadership, a failure of humility, and a failure to listen. And it stands as a permanent reminder that the difference between a life-saving tool and a death trap can sometimes be just a few cents worth of chrome, and the willingness to admit you were wrong. The rifle they said couldn't be made became the rifle that has armed America for over 60 years, and the story of its near destruction at the hands of its own masters is a chapter of history we should never forget. What do you think is the most important lesson from the M16 saga? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories that uncover the hidden history behind the world's most important technologies, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.